Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. We're going to do a quick version of this scene right here. This is on a full page glossy cardstock, and I used my hybrid inks with this one, but we'll do it in dye-based inks that I know people will have, and we'll do it in a quarter size cardstock dimension. Okay, so this is just 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Most people have some matte cardstock on hand, but you can also do it on glossy cardstock. Okay, and you can just follow along and do it on whatever paper you want. All right, I wouldn't go with something like a copy paper, you know, just like scrap paper or something like that in terms of the ink saturations that we'll be applying. But some, you know, kind of nicer paper, stiffer paper, whatnot. It'll look different, you know, depending on what brand of paper we're using, what types. I would go with something smooth as opposed to like a linen or, you know, highly textured watercolor paper or something of that sort, okay? Something fairly smooth, okay? But I'll be using just the back side of my glossy cardstock. This is not matte cardstock on the back side because it's uncoated as far as I know. So it's kind of not even a really good type of paper, but use whatever you have. Alright, now the stamps I'll be using are a couple different types of trees. I'll use this bear tree as well, this bear pine, the Milky Way large, and cloud cumulus. The cloud cumulus is pretty key here, but you can substitute other types of sky imagery if you want to, like a moon or stars or something of that sort. Star cluster would work really good. You can even do a sun or something like that. I know a sun wouldn't be in a nighttime sky, but you know, try to make this one all about the concept, okay? And work around what you have. If you don't have those ones, you can always order on the website. I have a couple different bird stamps right here, the eagles. They're pretty good for kind of going back into perspective, but you can use other types of birds or other types of wildlife in the sky. Okay, now here's the thing with these supplies that you'll be able to mix and match, okay? I'll be using the Memento pads, alright, but I mean, if you have some distress pads and whatnot, you can use those ones. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working through a range of values of blue, okay? So I have the light blue, kind of a medium blue, and a darker blue. It's good to have that nice range of tones. You can certainly mix and match. Here's a tumbled glass re-inker distress ink that I really like. A lot of the distress ink colors, but just about every line out there has a nice range of blue tones, okay? And I think a lot of people have, you know, like 3 different versions of blue, okay? Hopefully they're not all so dark versions or something like that. Even if you have 2, you can just go with these 2 or something like that, you know? In terms of value, you can change brands and whatnot. Okay, you want a good, solid, black ink pad, something that's going to give you a nice dark impression, okay? Usually everyone has their favorite black ink pad. I'm going to be using the Versafine. It's a pigment ink, and it's nice and deep and saturated in terms of creating a nice contrast between the background we'll be creating and our foreground imagery. Some kind of white pigment ink is going to be good, and for those of you that have the bleed proof white, if you've watched my other videos, this will be a really good one to use to create some additional texture. If you don't have something like this, or you have this and a white gel pen, those will come in handy in terms of achieving a nice, you know, rich range of textures within our scene, and to create contrast between really sharp little points of white light in our scene. They represent stars. I'm going to be using an old toothbrush for my bleed proof white, and for my applicator, everyone's going to have some version of the applicator I'll be using in the form of just a paper towel, okay? And then we'll be using a cotton ball for the application of our white pigment ink, okay? Alright, so you can get all those supplies ready, and we'll get started here. You can pause this video if you need to kind of get your collection of media together. I'll have the list of, you know, description of all the supplies that we're needing in the description section below this video as well, so you can expand that section if you're on a computer or phone or I don't know, tablet, whatever you're using. Okay? Alright, so let's get started here. What I'm going to be using on my cloud cumulus is the darker blue that I happen to have, okay? Whatever kind of navy bluish tone you're working with, grab that one. Cloud cumulus, I have kind of a do's and don'ts type of thing on how to, or video on how to use this cloud cumulus, but one of the things that I like to do is after I ink it up, okay, do you see where those kind of billows are like that? Well, right on the top side of it, in the direction that we'll be using, I kind of wipe off the top like that, okay? You don't have to wipe off all the ink, but I wipe off a pretty good portion of it. You can even do it on the sides like this as well. I don't really do it on the bottom too much, but you certainly can. Alright, now I didn't take off that amount of ink right there, but that was one of my applicators from yesterday. But here's what we do with the cloud cumulus. I'm not rocking this when I'm doing it and putting tons of pressure on the outside edge. I'm putting it down, I'm giving it center pressuring like this. I give it a pretty good pressure when I'm using matte paper, because matte paper is usually not going to be quite as smooth as glossy. Okay, it's going to be a little bit, well, I don't know, matte cardstock will be a little bit more smooth, but what I did there, see where it's lighter right in there? That's going to create a nice transition for when I stamp another one, like right in here. So it fades out where it's going to fade into the next impression. Re-ink in between all of your impressions, okay? And don't be, here, I'll use a clean part of my paper towel so you can see how much I'm taking off, okay? I'm going about half an inch into it in the top, maybe even an inch, okay? Like that. See, I took off a pretty good amount there, alright? Do it with a dry paper towel, not a wet paper towel, though. Center pressuring, okay? In other words, we don't want the edges to print out really hard and distinct, okay? We want all these impressions to really merge in with one another. See how seamless that is? And I just really just kind of wiped off this part of it, and I wiped off this part of it. So on this one, I wiped off the right side, this one I wiped off the left side. Okay? And I'll do the same thing like that. Okay, now I have the billows facing inward, okay? Not like this, where the lighting is kind of bottom lit. I have it interior lit like that. Okay, so let's just keep doing this now. We're going to follow the same process with each one of these impressions, okay? Ink, wipe off. Don't be too gingerly with it. Take a good amount of it off too, okay? Not just like this, like that, okay? Don't keep it too square. Kind of go into it a little bit. A little bit kind of irregular. Don't come in here and then, you know, that part of it though. Alright? Stamp, interior pressure. Get a good pressure on that now. You don't want to hold it like this, and then you lift it up and, oh, the entire center part didn't stamp out, okay? Alright, now I took a long time, but this is not a long process. I'll show you how fast it can go. Okay. Now this doesn't have to be, you can kind of leave some area open. I have that Milky Way stamp that I'm going to be using, and it's fairly large, okay? So just kind of stamp accordingly, okay? So see, every time I do this, I'm kind of keeping it interior lit like that. If you mistakenly accidentally stamp it upside down on one of these, don't worry about it. Just don't toss it out. Just, you know, just go with it. Alright, we're going to have a lot of other tones that we blend in. Something like that, it's not going to make a difference, okay? This is a very forgiving type of process right here. Stick with your card until the end too. You know, like I said, if sometimes people stamp it the wrong way and they go, oh my god, and they just toss this out. That's not what this entire system is about, you know, of stamping. It's about something very forgiving. You might run into some kind of unexpected, unintentional, unwanted parts in your process, you know, when doing these scenes like this with the amount of ink that we're going to be blending in, but it is not going to matter in the end, okay? All right, now I'm just taking the same blue and I'll color in my Milky Way stamp. The Milky Way stamp is also a rectangle just like the cloud, but we don't want it to read as just a large rectangle in the sky. Okay, there's a lot of surface area on there. Okay, now what are we going to do with our sky figures? I'm going to take this and about 1 inch or so I'll wipe off some ink so that it's drier on the outside edge, and thus it'll print lighter. So where it's printing lighter, it's merging in with the surrounding clouds so much easier, okay? You can do it this way or this way, whatever way you want to, okay? All right? Now, I could take the time to mask out some clouds, but the thing is if you wipe off the perimeter like that thoroughly, you don't have to, okay? And you can come up with these nice seamless clouds. So a lot of people think, oh my God, you're so talented and stuff like that, but you know, they think it's kind of some kind of precarious type of process that you're going through, but I'm telling you, it's more about the technique than anything. Yeah, you know, I've been using these stamps for a while, so okay, there's that Milky Way in there. I've been using these stamps for a while, so of course I know how to use them and whatnot, and there's design kind of theories and compositions, things like that, but for me, the technique portion, I mean, it's all using beginner technique. So things like that wiping off, that's not like some kind of advanced technique or something like that. If you want something to stamp out lighter, then you just stamp it drier. And wiping something off with a paper towel is not a hard technique. Okay, we want this now to be nice and rich in terms of our color scheme, but when we do coloring for lighting, it just means that we retain some of the lighter areas of our piece, okay? So I want some of these stars to stand out a little bit lighter. I'm just going to take my paper towel like this now. Okay, and I'm going with the lightest ink now. I've switched off, okay? Here's my 3 values of blue. I'm going with the lightest one that I have. If you have distress inks, you know, like a tumbled glass would work great. If you have Marvies, salvia blue or something like that. Okay, now here's coloring for lighting. If I colored that whole cloud, it would be completely dark, right? But now see, I've made this area of the cloud darker, so this area seems lighter, right? Now let's color a little bit on the interior into that Milky Way. See how I'm coloring some of this? It's kind of, you know, making some of my stars darker, but we're going to change that later with our bleed-proof white and or our gel pen, okay? Now this one has a really large star. I like to keep that really large star fairly light. Okay, see, this is just like finger painting or something. Where do we color in our clouds around the perimeter? I like to go with the perimeter, like this. See how much? I'll do the top and bottom differently, so you can kind of compare and contrast. Okay. See that right there? See how these clouds are really illuminated now. These ones are okay, but these ones have a much stronger sense of lighting, like the lighting is coming from in here because I've toned out the perimeter. Now let's do the same thing around the whole area, okay? You don't have to press hard or anything like that. Just kind of go like this. Kind of know where you're coloring. Don't accidentally just color everything out. Utilize your dry version of this, whatever ink you're using as well. See if I want a very light version of it. Like that. It's barely visible, right? But let's say I wanted it darker on the perimeter, like this, which I do. And I want a very light version of that ink in here. Then just use it drier, okay? So it's the same concept of stamping something out dry. It stamps out lighter. Now this is where I have complete control over the amount of ink that I'm using too and applying. The drier it is on here, the less ink that's being applied. So I can really watch it develop, you know, from, I don't know, maybe like 1% at a time or something like that. Say every pass gets it a little bit darker. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's like 1% blue, 2% blue, 3%, you know, instead of going like this, 100% of that ink or something like that. If I go like that, you know, then I'm using a really dark version of it, okay? But since I'm starting with a very light version, I'll show you how forgiving this is, okay? I can go like, don't do that, but you can, and it's not any big deal. So see, kind of building up your color like this, it makes it so much easier to get the right value that you want. Okay, so you see where this is now being, it has the illusion of being interior lit because these clouds on the kind of the inside facing the Milky Way are illuminated, okay? Now, whatever areas you've kept kind of lighter or white, retain that through the next two blues that we're using. This is where people kind of lose their lighting sometimes, okay? They get the feel of how to apply inks with their first color, but sometimes they go in just as far as they did with the first color with their next 2, 3, 4 colors or something like that. And now suddenly, instead of there being a really light blue in there, they've come in there and it's dark. So it's like they've gotten rid of all their lighting. Anytime when someone says they're having troubles with lighting, it's because they feel inclined, like here's a cloud, and they're thinking of a cloud like, you know, like on a traditional stamp, like it's, I don't know, it's like a puffy cloud or something like, here, my pen's not working right here, but it's something like this. They're thinking of an outline design of a cloud, and then they're used to coloring that whole thing in with like a pen or something like that, okay? But in this form of coloring for lighting, you're just kind of retaining some of those areas of light. So in this case, watch how fast this goes. Okay, see this right in here, and I'm coming into the little area in my Milky Way like this. So that kind of the darker I take the area around those billowing clouds, the lighter they seem. So see now, it looks like those clouds are reflecting the light coming from, you know, the stars. You know, they wouldn't be that lit, you know, there'd be a moon or something like that, but in this case, it's kind of the romance of the starlight or whatever. It's nice and bright. Okay? Alright, let's just do it with the darkest of blue. Now you're kind of moving into the same blue that you just stamped your imagery in. You know, if you have a range of, I don't know, 8 blues, you can try it. You probably don't need it, but you can use whatever ones you have. Try to take your jump from one value to the next nice and incrementally. Now watch this one. I'm going into the scene about 1 inch or so, but I'm kind of tapering it though. I don't just have a solid bar like that. I'm kind of blending it in from the outside edge in, okay? And the darker you take perimeter areas or some area within your scene, okay, the lighter the light areas will seem by contrast. We don't have like a flashlight, you know, in the back of our scene with real light kind of shining through, so what you're working with is contrast. So the darker you take some areas, and I'll put some of this into my Milky Way as well. Just because I'm going over this blue, or the 2 previous blues, it doesn't mean that those blues were, you know, kind of a wasted process. Those blues are shining through because these inks that we're using are transparent, okay? So see that right in there? That's a much richer blue than just using only that blue right there. See that? And see these blues right here? They're kind of glowing a little bit more because we have the ones underneath shining through, okay? Alright, but you can see here, kind of just going on the real edges right here now with this darkest blue. Sometimes you can get even darker just using more ink, okay? So that's when you kind of know to move on to your next ink, is when it just has gotten as dark as it seems like it's going to get. Alright, let's try a milled lavender in the scene that I did. Was it last night? I don't know. It was 2 nights ago. I have a little bit of a pink in it. Well, actually, that one has a lot of pink. Alright, so if you have any kind of lavender or whatever, or you can warm this up too if you have like a turquoise or something like that, or a really pale green, you can add it to this mix. This one's a milled lavender. It's a very kind of pale violet tone. Let's just try to see if we can change to a clean part of your paper towel now. And let's see if we can tweak the color range of this now. Okay, it's all blues right now. Kind of come into it a little bit with your tone in the darker area, and then creep a little bit of it into your lighter area. Now don't eradicate all of your lighting at this point. Don't just color all that part in, okay? Kind of retain that lightness in there, okay? I'll just use a little bit of it here because I like that light cloud, but I'll bring some of this into the white, okay? You can bring a very light version of it too by just going over it, a couple times. And you can blend some of this into your darker areas too. It kind of changes the spirit of it a little bit anytime you kind of expand the range of hue into your piece. It might create a color glow too when you do these analogous colors. That's colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. It creates a color glow. So in this one I happen to be moving into the violet range. You can move into the warm range too, like with some greens or something like that. But do you see that, how that changed that spirit of it? It kind of looks more full, doesn't it? But look at this, where I've retained some areas of light now. Now, some of you might have gotten rid of all of your light, okay? That happens, you got to put the brakes on your usage of color when doing this. But if you've gone too far, that's okay. Just keep working with it, okay? It's not something wrong, okay? You can work with it still. All right, now what I'm going to do is I like to usually use black right on the extremes of the card, the 4 corners, okay? So I'm going to bring some of that into it. Watch out with the black now, whatever one you're using. I'm using the dye-based black. Now this one doesn't have to be super dark, but it could be more of like a charcoal gray or something like that. Or you can use just a very dry version of it. But this black here tends to frame everything off really nicely when we are adding our dark foreground imagery, having that same value or same hue or tint. It just seems to contain everything a little bit better than not having it in there. So if I stamp out something, whatever I stamp in my scenery, whatever darkest color I've used, I usually like to use that framing off the piece. Not always, but usually. Okay, so one of the things that I did, kind of that created the spirit of this piece, was getting these kind of wispy, circular types of motions into the piece, okay? Now I think this is going to look pretty nuts, because it did on that scene too when I was doing it. I was thinking, I don't know if this is working. Okay, we're going to do this kind of circular type of application of this, and it looks kind of nuts, I know. But we're taking this white pigment ink, just on cotton ball, okay? I'll wipe some of it off too, because I don't know how much is on there. A lot of our white pigment ink pads are super juicy because we don't use them that much. I mean, I've had some pads that are 10, 15 years old. Not this one, but some other ones that are just still super juicy. I mean, I'm just not using it every day. Okay, now here's the motion that we're doing. I'm kind of going in this motion. I'm turning my card in a direction that's going to be the most conducive for this mark. I don't really see this too much in the lighter area because white on light doesn't show up as much, but I kind of see it in the darker area like that. That's why I've kind of made it a little bit darker too, so kind of just do it like that. Kind of leave a little bit of a, just a raw mark, you know. It's not like I'm coloring, I'm just kind of adding in the streak like this. Okay. Just find the mark that's going to be the most conducive, or the angle that's going to be the most conducive for your mark that you're making, okay? It's not a perfect circle, you know, because I'm doing these little archy kind of motions. It doesn't have to be perfect, okay? But anyways, there you have it right there. My other one's got maybe a little bit more extreme. Oh, here's what I did too. After I laid down that pigment ink like that, I was working with the hybrid inks, but let's just do this with dye-based inks. Let's go back in now. Well, let's go to the medium blue maybe. Maybe not the lightest blue, because the lightest blue won't even show up. Let's go to our medium blue again. And this is what I did. This gets a little anemic, okay? Anytime you go over it with that white, we lose some of that richness. So I might come back in here and do the same motion type of thing. Okay? Back into it. Kind of retain your lighting. Don't color everything out. See, I'm just kind of doing these streaks now. And I'm just kind of replicating the motion of the white pigment ink application, okay? Alright. Something like that. See how I'm adding kind of that brightness back into there? You might be removing, or you might be covering up some of the other white ink, okay? See that kind of vortex going? I mean, you can adjust. You can go back to the white if you want to. Oh, if you don't have a cotton ball, too. It's the ultimate applicator, right? Now, I'm using this because, you know, I know you'll have this. Not everyone has stylus tools, which I really love, which is a sponge tool. Okay, see this right here? I can even kind of go like that, kind of for that little mark, alright? It's kind of like a little smudgy twist like that, too, okay? So those little smudgy twists, it creates a little bit more of that vortex type of feeling, doesn't it? Alright, now, if you have it, the Dr. Martens Bleed Proof White is a lot of fun on here. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. Just skip this portion, you know. Continue working on your vortexy type of thing. I guess you can take like some of this ink here too, or the darker one, and you can do that little kind of mark like that too, if you want to. Just kind of get things spinning, you know, in terms of visually. All right, Dr. Martens Bleed Proof White. This is really fun stuff. You kind of get it on your brush. Take off a lot of it. Don't have tons of it on there, you know. I don't want to bleed and drop big splotches on here. I'll show you what this looks like right here. So we've done like a lot of finger painting here. This is like going back to, I don't know, elementary school or something. Kindergarten, in fact, preschool. We're doing this splatter painting. Now I have this thumb on here, and as I pull back on here, you see that? It's like stardust or something, or stars, I don't know, star pattern. I'll try to put a little bit more on the interior, maybe. Less in the exterior, but here's that texture. Look at that texture in there now. Isn't that fun? Now you can just add stars, too, with a white gel pen or something like that. White paint pen. If you have a silver pen, that would look interesting in this piece right here. Maybe I'll add some silver to it later. You can do whatever embellishments you want. Alright, but that was a really quick process there, right? Okay, now here's what we're going to do. Take your darkest black ink pad, okay? Hopefully you have one that's really nice and dark and not like an 80% gray. This one I'm using is a Versafine. It's a really super dark black pigment ink. Okay, it lays on the surface. That's going to help me a lot. If I went over this with a dye-based ink with these images, the white dots might show through. Don't worry about that, okay? If all you have is dye, maybe don't do the bleed-proof white until the end or something like that. Because those little white stars are going to be raised a little bit. You know, that bleed-proof white dries like almost like instantly, you know, the time it lands on this. It's a very chalky type of surface. Okay, pine trees. I'm going to start off with my spruce tree right here. I'm going to have everything aiming towards that large star right there, okay? If you don't have that large star, it's been toned out, you can't see it anymore, don't worry about it. Pick some area, you know, and clearly designate it visually so that you know where it is, and aim all of these trees that you're going to be stamping out at that one vanishing point, okay? Alright, you have to kind of decide which way's up and which way's down. You can do these trees first and decide later, but all these objects just aim right towards the middle, okay? Or not middle, but right at that vanishing point, okay? See how dark that is? So, all these trees. You don't have to cover up, you know, you can do... That could be it if you want to. I'm going to add more, though. I don't always have it going in at the same, you know, amount. I might be just using... See this one right here? I just used the tip of the tree. Okay. This one right here, where's this one going to go? There's the star, right? So I have this point aimed right at it. You don't need rulers or something like that. I don't know, if you feel comfortable, you know, doing that, then do whatever you feel most comfortable with. But just in general, I just eyeball it. I mean, I can tell that it's not going this way, you know, but just, you know, just in general, if I do it a little bit this way, a little bit this way, that's not going to matter. But just in general, singular vanishing point. So now it looks like everything's going back into perspective. Well, it's single point perspective in this case for these trees. Here's the pine tree. The other one was spruce. I like different kind of shapes and different types of pine trees together. Make a nice visual harmony. You see different types of trees growing together out in nature. One of the things that you'll kind of feel inclined to is, you know, spacing everything out absolutely symmetrically or perfectly. But see, I'm overlapping some of my other ones. Maybe I'll do an isolated version right over here. So kind of mix it up a little bit, have a little bit more of it in some areas. Like this. I don't want to come in here and just completely stamp right over the top of my focal point, you know, my vanishing point. So I kind of have the ones that are closest to it, you know, just using a, you know, a smaller portion of the tree. Okay, so let's take the leafless pine. I'll use the medium one here. There's a larger and smaller one. I used the larger one in my 8.5 by 11 just because it was, you know, there was so much space to fill in. But here's the larger one right here. I used more of the pink in that one than I did on this one. I could have used a pink as well. Alright, same thing. Leafless one. Just kind of have it aiming right towards that center. Look out. What a great contrast that makes right there. Having kind of that dead tree like that. I don't think that dead tree represents like death. It just represents, you know, kind of continuing process and, you know, I don't know, something kind of more realistic. If you see in a forest, a healthy forest at least. Alright, I think it's something like that. It looks good pretty much from all angles, I think. you can choose kind of which way you want. I don't like that one so much. I like this. I like this. And even that looks okay. Alright, so, I don't know, 3 impressions. I didn't even use the whole tree on these. Okay. Easy enough, right? And let's go with a couple of the eagles right here. This would actually even make a pretty nice kind of representational Valentine's Day scene. When you use 2 of something together, 2 animals, right? I don't know. I mean, you could do more. Represent something. Could represent a family. Okay. And I'll put this other one right down here, maybe, or so. Okay. Pretty dramatic piece. Alright, now if you have, like I said, those white gel pen, white paint pen, correctional pen. Some people used to use like liquid paper pens for this type of look here. And that would work fine too. Right now, I'm just to change kind of the scale of some of these dots. Well, I don't change them. I do these additional ones. And I think that kind of makes for a nice design element to have some larger dots. I only got kind of this fine spray with my bleed-proof white, but this one right here I can kind of, you know, make those dot sizes whatever I want to. I'll show you this right here. Kind of hold this up. You see why those larger ones are right around there? Maybe you could even do them around the perimeter where it looks like, you know, the stardust is kind of emanating, or it could represent light or something of that sort. Let me show you how to add a really nice textural effect now with this piece. Okay, you can go with like a cotton ball as well and go back to your white pigment ink. Okay, and turn this in. I have to be careful, even though that Versafine, it says instant dry pigment ink. It doesn't mean like as soon as it hits it, it's dry. It might be if you just stamp it on a white piece of paper, but we have all these saturated inks underneath that, you know, white pigment ink that we added in there, or black pigment ink that we added in there. So I can tell it's still a little moist, especially those birds. You know, you can kind of see that ink glistening on there. So I'm going to be careful not to go over that, but in these areas that are a little bit white, I can kind of illuminate those ones a little bit, or I can illuminate that star a little bit, where it's kind of in this kind of foggy, illuminated haze. Okay, it's a nice textural addition to the piece. Okay, now I'm just lightly dabbing. Okay, as soon as I touch it, I'm kind of lifting up, and I'm just kind of tapping in a little bit at a time, okay? Again, I have to be careful that I'm not smearing. I would normally wait to do this portion. You know, I want to wait for that black ink to dry. If I'm doing this on the glossy side of my card, too, it's really important because the that Versafine takes a while to dry on glossy. When they mean instant dry, they mean on matte paper. Okay, I'm looking at this, and I think I can go over a lot of this right now with my white pigment ink. It seems to set up pretty good doing it on the matte. I'm used to working it on glossy. But look at these trees right here, these tree tips right here, kind of aiming in towards the light, right? This is interior lit. So one of the things I can do with this is I can go over, and I'm just barely touching, okay, those tree tops. Okay, like so. I'll show you what this looks like a little bit closer up here. Do you see those treetops right now where they're kind of have a little bit of that lightness to it? And doesn't it look like they're kind of being illuminated by the interior lighting? Look at this tree right here. Let's go on a little bit of that. Add a little bit more and more. See that right there? Doesn't it look more dimensional this way? adding a little bit of white pigment ink like that. See that? Doesn't it look like those trees are now being kind of, as they go up into the sky, back in perspective, single vanishing point, they're kind of being illuminated now. I mean, you can put it on there or not. I think it looks good both ways to have it real solid, but if you want a little bit of variation, go ahead and add it in there. And that little haze back there is kind of a nice light. It's a way to go back in and add light into dark like that. It's really fun. Okay, now another thing that's really fun too is if you take that same concept of this kind of this illuminated haze or whatever. This is just a cotton ball that I've kind of frayed and kind of unraveled a little. Let me see if I can get this to focus in here. Okay, camera. Alright, but hopefully you can tell that that Q-tip's kind of fuzzy. Sorry, it's not. This is supposed to be an autofocus, but anyway, you get the idea. A little bit of ink on this, okay? Now, if you tapped into your super wet, juicy pad of pigment ink, mine's a little bit medium dry. I'm going to blot this off. Even I took way too much on here. You want to kind of blot this off now until I'm kind of smashing down the tip right here too, which is good because I want a soft application of this. You want it to where when you just touch your paper, barely anything shows up, barely anything is transferring to this scene. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to illuminate some of those larger star areas that I picked up some of that black there. Here, let me do this again. Let me just I blotted it off on the black pigment there because I wanted you to see what I was doing. But it picked up some of that black, so let me just take some fresh ink right here. Alright, let's illuminate some of these stars. Just go very light tapping, okay? If you're seeing a big blob, then you haven't taken enough off the tip of this. Okay, so some of those larger ones I'll just kind of illuminate like so, and they make kind of a really great textural contrast in the scene. It's something very soft looking. It's like this little fuzzy, glowing ball of light in here. It's kind of like little magical little, you know, spheres, you might call them. What they are, I don't know. Could be a, you know, a light flare or something like that, like a camera flare. They look really fun, though. If you put too much, if you put a big blob of ink in there, just take a paper towel and wipe it off before it dries, and it'll come right off. Okay, but anyways, you see these right here? You can even do it on some of those smaller splatter painting little dots, too. Maybe just do a tiny application of it. You see all those little glowing spheres of light? Doesn't it look like it's kind of emanating out like that? You can even have one. Let's add one right over the front of some of these trees. Okay, like this. I'll make the little dot kind of large, like it's coming outward like that. Kind of dry that little gel pen dot, but see how many times it takes me to tap this for it to show up right here? Okay. You don't want to put a big blob of, you know, ink like that. So here's these ones in front. So doesn't it look like it's kind of emanating out a little bit? It gives it a little bit of spirit and texture. All right, so that is it. We've crammed a ton of technique into this piece right here. It's all my little tricks in this one card, and it's done on matte cardstock. I think the matte cardstock has a lot of dimension here. The glossy, the inks are going to be a little bit more saturated and deep, okay? So this is like an example of the full page glossy, okay? A little bit deeper, a little bit more saturated, but look at this one right here. We got a pretty decent amount of dimension in this one. A little bit more pink in this one would have looked good. You can, you know, do something like that too. But if you've gone through this, you've learned all the techniques that I do in my scenes, and you can apply that to other scenes. It's not just for this one. The way that we retain light, apply texture and contrast in our scenes, and even movement with that kind of wispier look like that is a really fun thing to do. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the entire process if you stamped with me in this little stamp along video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any problems with anything, drop me a note in the comment section, or you can email me at stampscapes@gmail.com and send me a photo of the thing that you created, your scene, or if you have any problem areas, and I can usually say, okay, you needed to do more of this, or you can add it on, you know, over the top of what you already have. There aren't really scenes that I've seen out there that have gone astray and are, you know, unrepairable or something like that. They usually just look incomplete to me, where another color or two looks good. Alright, so anyways, thanks again for watching. Thanks for tuning into the Stampscapes channel. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe.